Every major motocross brand uses aluminum frames. KTM doesn't. And it's not because they're behind, it's because they believe aluminum lies to riders. So why does KTM still trust steel when the rest of the industry moved on decades ago? In 1997, Honda dropped the CR250R with an aluminum perimeter frame and changed motocross overnight. The frame was revolutionary but flawed, so rigid initially that it earned the nickname the lead pipe among Honda's own test riders. The handling was so compromised that Jeremy McGrath, fresh off 3 straight Supercross titles on steel-framed Hondas, left Team Honda rather than race it. He made up stories about licensing agreements. The truth was simpler. He just didn't want to ride that bike. But despite the rocky start, the blueprint was set. Honda refined the design, and within a few years, Kawasaki followed, then Suzuki, then Yamaha. Aluminum became the industry standard. Lighter, stiffer, easier to market as innovation. By the early 2000s, if you were not running aluminum, you were seen as stuck in the past. If you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. Hit subscribe and stay in the gate with us for the next breakdown. Back to the video. KTM watched this entire transformation happen and chose isolation. They kept building chromoly steel lattice frames, robot welded for consistency, tuned through geometry and metallurgy instead of thickness variations. Modern KTM steel isn't 1980s steel. The alloy composition, heat treatment processes, and welding precision are light years beyond old CR frames. But the material choice stayed constant. In motocross, everyone copied aluminum. KTM chose a different religion entirely. Here's what KTM actually uses: a chromoly steel lattice frame, meaning thin wall tubing arranged in a space frame pattern, welded by robots for consistency. Chromoly is steel alloyed with chromium and molybdenum, giving it exceptional tensile strength without needing thick walls. The frame weighs roughly the same as modern aluminum frames, sometimes even lighter, because steel's superior strength-to-weight ratio allows thinner tubing. KTM doesn't tune feel with wall thickness variations like aluminum brands do. They tune it with tube diameter, tube placement, weld location, and controlled flex zones built into the design. The frame is not a rigid box trying to eliminate all movement. Instead, it's a dynamic component of the suspension system, designed to work with the fork and shock instead of against them. That's the critical philosophical split. Aluminum frames resist flex by design. The goal is rigidity, immediate response, sharp feedback. Steel frames use flex as a feature. KTM believes a frame should absorb some impact energy, filter harsh inputs, and let the suspension do its actual job without fighting a locked-up chassis. It's the entire design philosophy. Now here's the controversy, and this drives the comment section every single time. Riders who switch from Yamaha, Honda, Kawasaki, Suzuki to KTM often complain about a vague front end, a dead feeling, or difficulty trusting the bike initially. They say it doesn't give clear feedback, that it wanders in corners, that it feels disconnected. These complaints are real and consistent. KTM engineers have been hearing them for 20 years straight. But most of those complaints come from riders switching from aluminum frames. Aluminum rewards aggression. You attack a turn entry, the frame locks up under load, the bike responds instantly, and you feel every ripple through the bars. It's reactive, sharp, gives you constant sensory input. That immediate feedback makes aggressive riders feel connected. Steel rewards neutrality and flow. You enter smoothly, let the bike settle into the turn, trust the chassis to absorb mid-corner chatter, and carry speed through consistency instead of spikes. The feedback is absolutely there, but it's quieter, more filtered. It doesn't scream at you with every bump. It whispers what you need to know. This fundamental difference is why opinions on KTM frames are so extreme. Riders who thrive on aggression and instant response hate KTMs immediately. The bike doesn't give them what they're used to. Riders who value smoothness and late moto consistency never go back once they adapt. It's not about skill level, it's about riding style and what you've learned to trust. If you override a KTM, it punishes you with vague handling. If you ride it neutral and let it work, it rewards you with less fatigue and better traction. Here's KTM's real philosophy, and this is the absolute heart of what makes them different. KTM doesn't chase the fastest single lap, they chase the fastest average lap after 35 minutes of racing. That's the fundamental difference in design priorities. An aluminum frame might give you a blistering first 10 minutes because the stiffness feels alive and responsive when you're fresh. But as the track deteriorates, as you get tired, as your forearms pump up, that stiffness becomes a liability. The impacts transfer straight into your body because the chassis isn't absorbing anything. The suspension tries to work, but the rigid frame limits how effectively the fork and shock can actually move. By Moto 2, you're cooked, your arms are blown, your decision-making suffers because you're surviving instead of racing. Steel absorbs the micro chatter and high-frequency vibration that aluminum can't filter. The frame flexes just enough, in controlled zones, by design, to let the suspension work freely without binding or spiking. This keeps the rider measurably fresher over race distance. Your hands don't go numb as fast, your forearms don't pump as hard, your decision-making stays sharper late in the moto when races are actually won. KTM optimizes for long motos, rider fatigue reduction, and predictability over chaos. That's why their bikes feel boring in the first 15 minutes, and brilliant in the last 15 when everyone else is falling apart. This philosophy comes directly from KTM's enduro and European motocross roots. European GP tracks are rough, long, brutally technical, and deteriorate into moon craters by Moto 2. Riders do 35-minute motos on surfaces that would destroy an American supercross track in 10 laps. Enduro racing demands a bike that survives relentless punishment for hours. KTM built their motocross frames with that same durability and long-distance consistency mindset. They didn't care about impressing magazine testers with sharp handling in a 20-minute ride. They cared about what actually works when you're tired, under pressure, and racing on a blown-out track in Moto 2, and the results don't lie. Jeffrey Herlings, over 100 Grand Prix wins, 5 world titles including 2 MXGP championships in 2018 and 2021, dominated on steel-framed KTMs his entire career. Antonio Cairoli, 9-time world champion with 94 GP wins, spent his entire prime on KTM steel. Cooper Webb, 3 450SX titles, including 2019, 2021, and 2025, rode KTM steel to 2 of those championships before moving to Yamaha for his 3rd. None of these riders needed a nervous, twitchy bike. They needed one they could trust when tired, pressured, and racing on brutal tracks where consistency matters more than peak performance. Herlings and Cairoli are both perfect case studies for KTM's philosophy, but for different reasons. Herlings is known for his attacking, aggressive riding style, relentless speed, fearless commitment, pushing the limits lap after lap. That aggression could destroy him on a bike that amplifies every mistake, but the steel frame absorbs his attacks without punishing him for it. The chassis lets him hammer through bumps and ride at the edge without the rigid feedback that would cook his arms in 10 minutes. Cairoli was the opposite, smooth, technical, patient. He liked his bike to feel small and manageable, with linear power delivery and predictable handling. He'd turn on a dime, make direction changes mid-corner, and ride technical lines that required precision. The steel frame gave him that trust and control without the harshness. Cooper Webb on KTM was somewhere in between, aggressive when he needed to be, but he learned to trust the chassis under pressure instead of fighting it constantly. So why does KTM absolutely refuse to switch? They could, they have the engineering capability. KTM has built and tested aluminum frame prototypes in their R&D department, but they won't commit to production, and here's exactly why. First, flex tuning is dramatically easier with steel. You change tube diameter in a specific section, adjust wall thickness, move a weld location, and the handling changes predictably. Aluminum frames require thickness changes across larger sections, and those changes affect weight distribution and geometry more drastically. Steel gives KTM faster development iteration and more precise control over feel. Second, platform consistency across the entire lineup. KTM uses similar frame geometry and flex philosophy across their whole range: 125 two-strokes, 250 Fs, 450S, enduro bikes, rally bikes. That consistency means riders moving between models feel immediate familiarity. The 250F feels like a smaller 450. It also means KTM can develop suspension settings, geometry changes, and engine characteristics around a known, stable chassis baseline instead of chasing a moving target every model year. Third, brand identity genuinely matters. KTM is the orange bike that does things differently. They don't follow Japanese trends, they set their own path. If KTM switched to aluminum tomorrow, they wouldn't gain measurable speed. They'd lose the identity that differentiates them. They'd become another Japanese-style bike with different plastic. The steel frame is embedded in KTM's DNA, and walking away from it would erase decades of hard-won trust from riders who chose them specifically because they're not like everyone else. Now here's the uncomfortable truth, and this is where the mic drops. KTM's steel frame isn't objectively better or worse than aluminum, it just exposes rider weaknesses faster and more brutally. If you override, if you muscle the bike, if you force inputs and attack everything with aggression instead of flowing, a KTM feels absolutely terrible. Vague, dead, untrustworthy. The frame won't lie to you or mask your mistakes with sharp feedback that feels like performance. It shows you exactly what you're doing wrong by simply not responding the way you expect. That's why riders either love or hate KTMS within 10 minutes. But if you ride neutral, if you let the bike work underneath you, if you trust the chassis and suspension to do their jobs, a KTM feels incredible. The traction is measurably better because the tire stays planted through chatter. The comfort is better because impacts get filtered before reaching your body. The consistency is better because the bike behaves predictably lap after lap. And 30 minutes into a moto, when everyone else is arm pumped, making mistakes, and overjumping whoops because they can't feel their hands, you're still smooth, still fast, still in control. That's the actual payoff KTM designed for. KTM didn't stick with steel because they couldn't change or couldn't afford to innovate. They stuck with it because they knew exactly who they were building for and what actually wins races. They built for riders who value long-moto performance over short-term marketing hype. They built for riders who trust feel and consistency over aggression and peak response. They built for riders who want a bike that works with them as a partner, not one that fights them and demands to be dominated. And that's exactly why this argument will never end. Now, if you think KTM sticking with steel is controversial, wait until you see what happened when Ducati entered motocross. They brought world-class engineering, insane expectations, and still didn't shake the dirt bike world. Click the next video. Why Ducati's motocross bike didn't shake the dirt bike world. And if you want more deep dives like this, hit subscribe. See you there.